So we've got unelected bureaucrats running the show. Nobody voted for them. We didn't vote for any of these people. And then you've got executive orders that are clearly unconstitutional. So I think this House bill would be a start or a good place to make our state stronger, and hopefully could be leading a type of thing for states around the country. There are several states that have sovereignty bills. Like there's certain sovereignty bills in Oklahoma and Texas and Montana and several places pending right now. So it is a movement across the country, and we need to be part of that. We've got it's a we the people situation with our Constitution. We don't need to be overruled by worldwide interests.
Welcome, everybody, to another amazing episode of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider, your wonderful, your beautiful, your illustrious candidate for Kentucky State Treasurer. Now, for the record, I've been doing this podcast for years now, I believe, over 2 years now. So this podcast started long before I was running for state treasurer, but obviously I'm running for state treasurer now. I'd love your support, love your vote. And as always, you can find more about me at Cooperrider, I'm going to give you the short one, Andrew4ky.com. That's Andrew, the number 4ky.com and the number 4. So Andrew4ky.com to check me out there. As always, guys, you can help out by like, comment, sharing, subscribing, and pushing this out there to continue to share this with all your friends, all your family, as we take our time to push this out there each and every week. And today I am joined by State Representative Rawlings from Northern Kentucky, Steve Rawlings, and he's joining us. It's actually perfect timing, as those of you who are devout listeners, and I know there's thousands of you out there that are devout listeners. Last week, you heard me talk about bills 1 through 50 in the House. Well, my next set of bills I was going to talk about was going to be about 50 through 100. And it just so happens that the Representative Rawlings here happens to have a good number of bills in that, important bills. And so he actually reached out to me, said, hey, I've got some bills coming up I'd love to talk to you about. And I said, sure, go ahead. And that tells you it's a good representative, because he wants to talk to the people about what he's offering. He wants to get out there and inform the public. You know, the representatives that try to hide from you, they're bad. Clearly, Rawlings is a good one if he's willing to get out here and talk to you and actually request it. So thank you for joining us, Representative. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, Steve Rawlings, Representative, State Rep for District 66, which is the very northern tip of Kentucky. So we are very close to Indiana and then Cincinnati. So I'm newly elected, and I was excited. Once I won the primary, I started writing bills. I started working on bills and was really anxious to get started. So there's constituents and voters here that supplied me with some ideas. So I think it's really neat that I could work on ideas that actually came from the voters. So most of these I'll be talking to you about today are from constituents. So I appreciate it, Andrew, for giving me an opportunity to talk about these.
Absolutely. And so, Representative, you've got a couple of good ones. You said constituents kind of gave them to you. Let's start off with, work through them however you want, whether it's the one you're most excited about, or you can work through them numerically, whatever you want to do. Tell us about the bill. Tell us what it seeks to do, and why you think it's important.
Okay, I'll go through them numerically since you've been working through them in that order. So House Bill 57, that is an act relating to the right to refuse medical treatment. So that is a bill about medical freedom and bodily autonomy and informed consent. So it's I'll give a brief summary of these. No person, employer, entity, or healthcare provider should require, mandate, or coerce a competent adult to receive or use a medical procedure, treatment, or a shot, a prophylactic, a pharmaceutical, or medical device. So this is based on really how we lived 3 years ago. Before the last 3 years, people didn't have to get medical treatment. People weren't required to get any kind of shot or any kind of treatment at all. So I'm just going back. I want to emphasize this is how we lived under our Constitution, our constitutional rights. we the people, and that's all changed. And I want this to go back to the way it was. There's a lot of legislators, including Republicans in the House, that focus on employer rights. So they believe that an employer should be able to choose. If an employer wants to require some medical treatment of some kind, they think that's okay because a private employer should be able to do whatever they want. And I disagree with that. I want this to be based on the people and on we the people and the Constitution, and on informed consent, going back to the Nuremberg Code, on bodily autonomy, and on medical freedom. So this is a medical freedom bill.
Now let me say, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. Okay.
Sure.
All right. So, I mean, obviously one is I like to first, when I talk about things, and I'm about to say things that may not actually be my viewpoint, and I want the listeners to know that. Okay.
Right.
But as you know, Representative, I was a very outspoken person against any kind of mandate, including employer mandates, when it came to the recent pandemic. And, you know, a big part of the reason why, and I heard people talking about this whole, well, their employers' rights and everything else. My pushback to that was always about the fact that I understand you. However, there is no private market incentive to actually be mandating these things, that in this case, the pandemic treatment. We're trying to stay away from those keywords, those of you on Facebook.
Right.
But we're trying to stay away from that mandation. And I always kind of drew it to say, look, the government, through purveying false and incomplete information, not allowing accurate information to come out, while also using our tax dollars to create incentive programs, and then also using our government regulations to coerce certain businesses into mandating these treatments, were creating an environment where they were creating an incentive outside of a profit incentive for an employer to mandate something that maybe isn't necessary. Now, so you separate that out, where that's a situation where you had something that new, unheard of, and everything else. Now, common pushback, though, was they would draw conclusions to other things, such as nurses being required to take the flu shot, people in childcare, they have to take what is it? It's not hepatitis. Is it no, it's something, tuberculosis. Is that it? TB. Yeah, you got to take a TB shot, I think, to be in to work around children, things like that. Now, so a person listening to you that's providing pushback, I'm not saying this is my viewpoint, but would say a person listening to you would say, well, what about nurses having to take other things outside of just the pandemic shot, which we can put that to the side maybe, and also the TB shots around childcare, things like that. Things have been going on for years. Are you saying this bill would also address that as well? And how do you push back on somebody who says that?
It'd be difficult to get a lot of momentum on this. I hope that people's minds are changed, though, as we've learned that following the science they weren't following the science, and the facts that they gave us weren't true. And so I think all vaccinations should be examined and questioned. We need answers. We don't need their hypothesis or what they feel like. So I think it goes back to this whole field is problematic, and I just don't believe that things they've told us are necessarily true. So this bill is all encompassing. I realize that it's just out and out medical freedom, and I know soldiers in the military need to take certain shots, and government employees, but this is for private individuals and adults, consenting adults.
So what you're saying is that, look, through this whole process, the medical establishment has proven that they are able to be bought. They are willing to stifle other people's thoughts and dissenting conversations. And because of that, we need to take a look at anything that's been accepted as just scientific fact and say, look, is that really something we want to be pushing or not? What are the actual effects of this? Just because they've proven themselves to be untrustworthy recently.
Right. And
okay.
People talk about a great awakening, and I do think there's aspects of that this has been an awakening. This information is getting out there now, and we're seeing truths that we weren't aware of before that were hidden. And so these things are known. And I think all the people that relied upon these shots should have to answer for where they've been wrong about it. They've lied, some have just outright been wrong. And it wasn't based on the science.
Have you looked at anything that the state of Kentucky, and we've seen Florida, and I think we've seen some other states make some moves here to actually get some of these people in to testify in front of their congressional bodies or things such as that in order to get to the bottom of what exactly was going on, what information is being purveyed. Obviously I know our Frankfurt's a little bit different than the Republican majorities in other states typically are. And I know there may not be as much appetite for that, but do you think there's any appetite for any kind of commission to look into even just simple things like the numbers? How was the state generating our daily update numbers? What went into that? How was that generated? Is there any appetite for at all anything like that up there?
Well, Andrew, you watch international and national news like me, and it's across the world. And if you watch little bits and pieces of things happening in Germany and the Netherlands, Australia, there is a movement. There's a rebound, and people like us that want to get to the truth. But I don't know that the consensus is here yet. We're seeing adverse reactions, cardiac arrest, and we're seeing deaths, and the all-cause mortality rates are way up in many, many places around the world even. So I think we're seeing a rebound in this. So it's just a matter of timing. And I think we're going to know a lot more. We're learning more each day.
So what else do you have for us this session here?
So House Bill 58, that's an act relating to protecting the exercise of medical ethics within the medical profession. And a medical practitioner, healthcare institution, or healthcare payer should have the right not to participate in or to pay for any healthcare service which violates their conscience. For example, a practitioner should not be forced to perform an abortion against their will, against their conscience or their religious beliefs. And now, now in society, we're seeing so many things going on, like forcing a doctor to remove healthy body parts from a minor child. So there's a lot of pressures out there. So my bill would help to protect doctors and nurses and practitioners to enter the profession. Right now, there's vast shortages around in many places. And so we want to encourage doctors and nurses to pursue the profession. And because ultimately, who would it hurt ultimately? It would hurt underprivileged and poor. If there's not enough care to go around, people having to be on waiting lists, it would hurt the people. So we need to address this. This is a method of doing something up front to prohibit these unintended consequences of liberal legislation. So when I work up front, this has gotten a lot of attention, House Bill 58. So I've gotten support from Alliance Defending Freedom is working with me on the bill, and Christus Medicus Foundation, Christian Medical and Dental Association, Catholic Medical Association, and the Family Foundation. So there's a bunch of groups out there wanting to help. If there's any doctors or nurses or professionals out there that can help, I sure appreciate it. If you can call your legislator and ask them to co-sponsor the bill, that would be great.
Now, you said that came to you as an idea from a constituent. I imagine this constituent probably is in the medical industry of some sort when they came to talk to you, because it's a very kind of a niche thing for them to be concerned about, or something that, you're speaking of, saying that, hey, people are worried about this in the medical industry. Did they have a story about what they were worried about, or a situation they found themselves in where they're being asked to violate their ethics?
No, it actually wasn't. It was a person that deals with a lot of people in the medical industry and runs a ministry, really, and he wants to protect the rights of people who are faith-based, religious, Christian, any of the ethical or moral people that are part of his organization. He wants to protect them. And so I was sent an article with the states that have conscious acts, and that's where I was able to reference their language and their statutes. So there's Mississippi, Arkansas, Ohio, and even Illinois has conscious protections for providers.
Now, and that's conscientious objection too, not just religious, because, as we're seeing, as we saw during the last few years, suddenly private employers and government decided that they needed to weigh it in on what is a religious exemption, what isn't, and facing that, and I think just being a conscientious objector, where it kind of takes out that whole, well, prove it to me that this is your religion thing. You don't have to worry about that witch hunt going on.
Right. Well, in this case, it comes from our Constitution, the Kentucky Constitution, Section 5 of the Bill of Rights. It references a person's conscience. It's wording that just fits this bill perfectly. So really, we've already got this in the law from our Constitution. But Andrew, how we've had to enact laws on top of laws because of what's going on in the culture. So
take, what is it, last year, Shane Baker's, right to worship bill, where he had to pass a bill to say you have a right to go to church, and church is essential, or church is essential bill. And it's like, oh geez, I thought that passed back in the later 1700 or 1700s there. And I believe it was December. December, where that was signed and passed into law. And so, that for me was one where I'm like, I was kind of upset. I'm not upset over the bill. I was upset we even had to pass the bill, because we already had it in our Constitution. But, we got to make sure it's crystal clear, so that way our runaway judiciary and our out of control governor doesn't interpret that whatever way is currently convenient for them.
Yeah, you and I are on the same page and all that.
So what's you got another couple of bills there?
Okay, the House Bill 72. This is an act relating to the transfer of property on death. Co-sponsoring this with Representative Proctor. So this bill eliminates the Kentucky inheritance tax. Further allows for the transfer of a home or property to a family member without the property being listed in the will and without the necessity of going through probate. So this is kind of under the definition of an omnibus bill, because it's two different things, but they're somewhat related with a death. So transfer property without going through probate, transfer property without being in a will. Person can sign a form beforehand, and a lot of people, that's all they have is their home, and they can sign it, file it with the court. The moment they die, it goes to their relative, whoever they name. So it makes total sense. It's very straightforward. It's to help people not have to go through probate and somebody who fails to do a will. So that is one part of it. And then the other part, inheritance tax. Kentucky is one of only 6 states with an inheritance tax. There are exceptions for close family members, but for nieces, nephews, son-in-laws, extended cousins, extended family members, they still have to pay an inheritance tax. And
which probably causes some people to move out of state in their older age too.
Yeah, it affects the poor and the lower class too.
Yeah.
And you know how unfair that tax is.
Well, I mean, really, any kind of, I even think any kind of income taxing on retirement or inheritance is crazy, because, you're taxed when you made the money, and then you get taxed when it gets transferred. And it's like, they're like, well, it's new money to you. Like, no, you already paid you already got tax money off this income, and then you whittle it away, and that's it. Pretty well. And also too, the transfer of property without it having to be listed in the will. That's kind of interesting, because I know there's Medicare does this, where if you go into hospice or care or whatever, and they're paying for it, and you have something like a house or something like that, the government will take the house and then sell it off to pay off your medical debts. And so you see a lot of times people will transfer this before that time, but it's not technically an inheritance. You're transferring off property, so you're not passing on your debt basically to your your children. And so that's kind of interesting to see that portion where you can transfer property to your relatives without it having to necessarily be in the will and be considered part of the tax there. And
there are a lot of contingencies written into the bill. It's the longer bill that I have. For instance, if there's a claim on the property, that claim would still exist on the property. That doesn't wash away. But in an article I read, 29 states already have this bill. DC and somewhere like Puerto Rico. And so it's a very accepted thing. We just don't have it here.
Right, right. So do you have any other bills that you're working on or you've got filed?
One more of 4 that I have filed. House Bill 100. I was given the great number of 100.
There you go.
An act relating to the Legislative Research Commission. So a new subcommittee would be created, the Committee on Constitutional Enforcement, to review a federal action or a global organization action to determine if the action violates the Kentucky Constitution and the sovereign power of the people of the Commonwealth to regulate the affairs of Kentucky. So this
sounds like a 10th Amendment committee.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's a Kentucky sovereignty bill.
So for those who are unaware, the 10th Amendment of our federal Constitution states that any powers not outlined in the Constitution falls either to the states or to the people. And we see our federal government so often violating that and overstepping the bounds. And, some of the concern that people like me have always had is, well, if you have a Republican AG and a Republican president who's overstepping the bounds, because we know Republican presidents do it too, or a Democrat AG and a Democrat president overstepping the bounds of the 10th Amendment, that encroachment is still encroachment. And if it's falling to one person who's very political, and one AG person is very political, and generally speaking, if you're getting to that level, you're learning how to not rock the boat. Are you going to actually challenge the federal government when they're violating the Constitution? So is that what this committee then is seeking to do? Is for the legislature to be empowered to push back on the federal government?
Yeah, the state legislature has power, and they haven't been using it fully in instances like this. One of my motivating stories is when the WHO, World Health Organization, wanted to take over all the pandemic response and digital passports and all this stuff. And the Biden administration was okay with ceding our authority for the whole country over to the WHO. And so was Australia and Great Britain and Canada. And I think there was a vote at the UN, and many of the countries didn't vote for it. Like a lot of the African countries voted against that. So that saved us. Or they would have tried to cede power for this supposed pandemic response here in places like Kentucky. And the CDC has been issuing all these edicts like remdesivir to treat patients, in the hospitals, and all these terrible things. And so we've got unelected bureaucrats running the show. Nobody voted for them. We didn't vote for any of these people. And then you've got executive orders that are clearly unconstitutional. So I think this House bill would be a start or a good place to make our state stronger, and hopefully could be leading a type of thing for states around the country. There are several states that have sovereignty bills. Like there's certain sovereignty bills in Oklahoma and Texas and Montana and several places pending right now. So it is a movement across the country, and we need to be part of that. We've got it's a we the people situation with our Constitution. We don't need to be overruled by worldwide interests.
So, the question would be on that committee. I guess that would have to be formed as more of a statutory committee. But even then, typically while you guys are out of session, you don't have really much power at all. What would be the enforcement mechanism? So if that committee decides, hey, this is an overreach, it's violating our state constitution, or it's violating the federal constitution, and that can't happen here in Kentucky, what happens then? Do you guys issue an enforcement order to the executive branch to not allow it to happen? How does that work out?
It goes to the attorney general, and then also it says not only attorney general, but it can go back to the chambers for a vote. And so either way they can do it. So I believe when the place is out of session, when the House and Senate is not in session, that the committees, when they still meet during that time period, they could still refer it to the attorney general.
Okay, gotcha. So while you're out of session, I get referred over to the AG in order
for recommendation.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Now, Steve, it's your first year up there. Okay. What has been the most shocking thing you've seen to date or heard or done? that you can talk about, that you feel comfortable talking about?
Oh, there's so much. We had a busy week, and then we only met Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then there's like a 3-week lull, and then the session starts February 7th to March 30th. That's when the real work gets going. So I don't know. There were a lot of little things. One thing that I thought was funny was there's a House Bill 1 that we passed to decrease the sales tax from 4.5, the Kentucky sales tax, the Kentucky income tax, state income tax, from 4.5 to 4%. And the Democrats knew it was a passing vote. It was going to be 80 or more to 20 or less. They knew this, but they spent 2 hours on speeches. And I'm sitting next to Representative Tipton, and I said, what's going on? And each one had this dramatic presentation.
People will die.
Yeah, Jimmy Bob Sue, Garrett County, is going to lose that motorboat because he won't have this $200. And I mean, they just went on and on. And he said, well, basically what they're doing is it's sound bites, because the local stations, like in Lexington, they pick up, 1 or 2 speakers and they'll show it on the news. So that's so it was 2 hours of that.
And then we're just sitting there like
voted routinely yes, like in no time.
So boring. And we wonder why we don't have time for to get as much done as we sometimes want to get done.
And there I sit. I can't roll my eyes or knock the guy next to me and start talking about it. The camera's right on you the whole time. There's cameras throughout there. And you just have to be you're real studious, like you're taking this all in. You got
to bring a crossword with you. That's what you got. You got to print out some crosswords, some Sudoku puzzles on paper. And so it just looks like you're taking notes, and really you're.
It's funny to me because my daughter and son-in-law have a theater company, and it's all theater. Right. I can see the actors and Republicans too will rebut what the Democrats just said. And it's just such a show.
Well, and what's funny is I was actually in a meeting earlier this week with somebody. Doesn't really matter who, I'm running statewide. I meet with a lot of people constantly.
Yeah.
And they said something where this person was actually a registered independent. Okay. Because, their reasons. And they said, yeah, and what's so crazy is I asked, I forget who he said he asked one time about, what's going on up there and everything else. And they go, look, they go up there, they bicker like cats and dogs on the floor. They do their sound bites, their speeches, and then they get into the same car and ride together home because they're all from Eastern Kentucky or they're all from Western Kentucky, and they carpool together home. And so, they yell at each other on the floor. One saying you're killing people, the other one saying you're killing people. And then they get into a car and they drive home together for 3 hours, thick as thieves, literally thieves, but thick as thieves. And it's just like, it's so much for show that they don't really dislike each other. They're just pretending.
Yeah, that's it. Because me being an attorney, we used to talk about how attorneys are advocates and they're on both sides of the matter and they represent their clients. And then they go out and eat lunch together and their clients like, what's that about? We're supposed to be against them.
You're like, no, that's not how it works. And so it's really, and so I'm going to say this and you see if you agree with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say this statement. If you agree, just say, okay. And then I'm going to say something else. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So it would be like 2 sports teams playing each other, where on the court, they're ferocious, they're against each other, what have you. But off the court, they're fine friends, they get along, they even train together, and they hang out all the time. But on the court, they pretend, or at least they adopt a adversarial attack on one another, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the question, okay? One, when they do that on the basketball court, it's for the fans. A lot of times, the playing and that stuff.
Yeah.
But so I guess the question is do you think that's good or bad? Because your initial reaction is this is so much more serious than sports, right? Like you're telling, you're literally controlling people's lives a lot of times, destroying them a lot of times too. Is this mindset of, it's like a sports team event kind of thing, or we get our shots in, one, you're left to wonder how much of it is principle. Like, how principled are you? Right? Because if you actually thought that person was passing policies that were killing people, would you want to be in a car ride home with them for 3 hours?
No.
And if you actually thought their policies were destroying people's lives and controlling them like we've seen so many liberal policies do, would you want to ride in the car with them?
Well, there's a dirty word that I don't like. It's compromise. So I agree with what you're insinuating, that, I think we're at a very serious point, especially now in the world and in our state, nation, and the world. And there's no room for that kind of thing. So you want to be congenial or colloquial, what's the word? Or you want to be grace, you want to show grace, you want to be kind and want to show honesty and that kind of thing. But I don't know about all that other befriending them. That's at that level, I don't know.
Yeah, well, and that's where, it's one thing to say, look, this is a person I have to work with.
Yes.
That's one thing.
Right.
But and that's where it goes into the, like I said, the rhetoric side of things, right? If you actually believe, and so many of them do, that liberal policies, or they say liberal policies are destroying America, something I think is accurate.
Yeah. Why
would you want to be friendly with the person whose policies are destroying America?
No. No.
It's just, I get it. You got to get along, but there's a big difference between a working relationship, and I'm in business, and you're an attorney. Yeah. And so there is a big difference between a working relationship and liking somebody. I'll give you an example, right? My chemical suppliers. Okay. I don't have to like them. I don't care if they're the biggest jerk in the world. I care about the fact that the price is good and the product shows up on time, right?
That's right.
That's what I care about. I don't need to be their friend in order for us to do business together, okay? Yeah. But I think so many of these people feel like, well, I got to be friends with this person to do business with them. But maybe that goes into how they got elected.
Oh, yeah, the politicians.
Because they're all just, well, that's my friend, whatever. And so we all got to support him. I mean, yeah, his policies I don't agree with. And yeah, he's kind of awful and terrible, but he's my friend. And so I got to support him.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you just need to be careful, because you can get sucked in easy in that situation. So it's better just to be respectful and shake hands and agree to disagree and leave it at that.
Right. I certainly hear you. Well, Representative, thank you so much for giving us some time today. One more question.
Yes.
You talked about some bills, some great bills. If people listening, they said, I really like some of the bills I heard, how can I help get those passed? How can I get them through? What can they do in order to help get some of these bills passed?
Call the legislature, and one of the things I was advised as a tip, when you're calling in on bills, it can be too late and the legislator doesn't get the message in time. If you just leave it at the switchboard or whatnot, call and ask for the legislative assistants. They commonly are called LAs in Frankfurt. Call the LA and leave the note with the LA or the message with the LA, because they'll be more inclined to hand it to you or talk to you as you come through the door, where you can miss. It gets to be so hectic and busy down there. So that's just one little tip. So call the legislature.
How do you get a hold of the LA? How would somebody?
You can ask for the legal assistant to Steve Rawlings, for instance. So you can call.
So you call up to the switchboard.
Yep, and just
ask for the legal assistant to
Rawlings or your representative.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so you can call in. What about emails? Are emails effective? Not as effective? What do you think?
Early on, I'm not sure. It depends on the legislator, how they're valued and looked at. The first day I got in there was hundreds of emails, and so they didn't mean anything to me that day.
Yeah,
I couldn't comprehend it. It took me a while to catch up, and the LA helped all of us by going through them and separating the ones that were actually from people, from constituents.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So emails are good most of the time, but I don't think you can rely on them emailing, and you can't exactly rely on them because we don't have the time to check them all.
Right.
So if there's a bill coming up for a vote, it's best to call call in and tell them what you want, and you can leave the message for a number of people. But if you really want to be effective, call the LA and leave the message with the legal assistant.
Okay.
The legislative assistant.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thank you, Steve, for joining us, and thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Sure thing. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
Well, guys, that's what we have time for today. Thanks so much to Steve for joining us, filling us in on his bills. As he said, if you want to help out, call the legislative assistant for your legislator and ask them to support his bills. Ask them to sponsor them, ask them to co-sponsor them, ask them to vote yes on them if they come before the committee. That sends a clear message. Other than that, guys, thank you so much. Remember, share, comment, subscribe, get this out there, and you have a great day.